Steven Seagal strolled up to the entrance of the Grand Royale Hotel on a bright afternoon. The sun reflected off the glass doors, casting sharp lines across the polished marble floor. Guests bustled in and out, dragging their luggage behind them, completely unaware of the storm that was about to unfold. Steven wore simple jeans and a casual jacket, sunglasses shielding his eyes, exuding calm confidence. No entourage. No fanfare. Just him. As he reached the front desk, the staff's laughter cut through the hum of the lobby. They didn't recognize him, or at least, they didn't care. "Do you have a reservation?" the receptionist asked with a smirk, as if dealing with a minor annoyance. Steven replied quietly, "I'm here to check in." That should have ended it, but the manager, a man puffed up with ego and self-importance, stepped forward. Manager Davis, with his perfectly pressed suit and flashing gold watch, looked Steven up and down like he was a nuisance in his perfectly controlled lobby. "You must have a reservation," Davis said, tone dripping with condescension. "Who do you think you are?" The staff laughed harder, pointing and whispering, as if the moment were some kind of practical joke. A few guests glanced over, sensing tension, but most were too engrossed in their own check-ins to notice. Steven didn't raise his voice. He didn't glare. He didn't react. He just stood there, calm, collected, letting the moment stretch just long enough to make the arrogance in the room almost unbearable. Then the unthinkable happened. Davis leaned forward and said, almost mockingly, "I'm sorry, sir, we cannot accommodate you. No reservation, no room. Now step aside." He waved dismissively toward the exit, as if Steven were just another bothersome guest. For a few seconds, there was stunned silence. Guests paused mid-step. The receptionist froze, unsure how to respond. Even some staff members exchanged nervous glances. The audacity of the man in front of them, disrespecting someone who seemed so calm yet so commanding, created a tension thick enough to feel like it could be cut with a knife. What the staff didn't know, and what would become painfully clear in just 9 minutes, was that they had just kicked out the very person who owned the hotel. The one with the power to completely change their lives in an instant. And in less than 10 minutes, every single one of them would wish they could take back their arrogance. The clock was ticking, and the storm was about to break. It was a busy afternoon at the Grand Royale Hotel. The lobby was alive with motion. Guests wheeling their luggage across the polished marble floors, concierge staff rushing to answer phones, and bellhops darting between elevators and the main entrance. The subtle scent of fresh flowers mixed with the faint aroma of brewed coffee, giving the place an air of elegance, but also of controlled chaos. Manager Davis, the self-proclaimed king of the lobby, strutted across the reception area like a man who owned not just the hotel but the entire city. His gold watch flashed with every exaggerated gesture, and his voice carried authority, or at least what he believed authority sounded like, as he barked orders at his staff. "Hurry up with that luggage," he shouted at a bellhop. "Make sure the room is spotless. I don't want excuses." To Davis, power meant intimidation. The more he could make his staff nervous, the more important he felt. To him, respect wasn't something earned, it was demanded, often at the expense of others' dignity. Guests noticed the tension, but most simply avoided eye contact, too accustomed to the display of arrogance to question it. Then, the calmest storm entered the room. Steven Seagal walked through the revolving doors, his presence unassuming yet immediately noticeable. Jeans, a simple jacket, sunglasses shielding his eyes, no bodyguards or entourage. He moved with a quiet confidence that drew attention without demanding it. There was no rush, no fanfare, yet every eye in the lobby subtly shifted toward him. He approached the counter, his steps measured, almost serene. The staff initially didn't recognize him. The receptionist, still buzzing from Davis's latest tirade, barely glanced up. "I'm here to check in," Steven said, voice low and steady, carrying a quiet authority of its own. Manager Davis turned immediately, his eyes narrowing. He sized Steven up in an instant, noticing the casual clothes, the lack of any visible wealth or status. A smirk spread across his face. "You must have a reservation," he said, the tone thick with condescension. "Who do you think you are?" A few staff members chuckled nervously, thinking this was just a simple case of a guest being denied entry. Some leaned toward each other, whispering, "Who does he think he is?" They had no idea. They didn't recognize the man standing before them, the quiet storm that could change their entire day in mere minutes. Steven didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at Davis calmly, unflinching, and repeated, "I'm here to check in." The simplicity of his words contrasted sharply with the drama Davis was creating. The manager's smirk deepened, a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "We have rules here. No reservation, no room. Step aside before I call security," he said, gesturing with a dismissive wave. Around the lobby, staff laughed quietly, still thinking this was some minor disturbance. Guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but unsure how serious it was. Steven Seagal remained calm. His silence was louder than any argument. His presence carried a weight that Davis and his staff couldn't measure yet. For a brief moment, the busy lobby seemed to slow. Every rustle of luggage, every muted beep from the elevators, every hushed whisper felt magnified. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Davis, loud, arrogant, and insecure, commanding attention with noise and gestures. Steven, calm, quiet, and unassuming, commanding attention without uttering more than a few words. The stage was set. Before we continue, comment below. Have you ever been treated unfairly in a hotel? How did you react when someone in power acted arrogantly? Little did anyone know, the next 9 minutes would completely upend the authority in this lobby. What seemed like a simple confrontation over a reservation would soon become a lesson in respect, power, and humility that no one inside the Grand Royale Hotel would ever forget. The staff couldn't contain themselves. Laughter bubbled up at the reception desk, whispered comments darted through the lobby, and some employees even nudged each other, trying not to be too obvious. "Who does he think he is?" one whispered. "Is this guy serious?" said another. Their amusement hung in the air like a cloud, masking the growing tension that only a few guests seemed to notice. Manager Davis, brimming with arrogance, saw the laughter as confirmation of his authority. He straightened his tie, puffed out his chest, and wagged a finger at Steven. "Listen, troublemaker," he said, voice dripping with mock seriousness. "You are not welcome here. No reservation, no room. You need to leave now before I call security." Some of the staff snickered, thinking they had the situation fully under control. A bellhop shifted nervously behind the counter, unsure whether to intervene. Guests paused mid-step, their eyes flicking between the manager and the calm figure before him. A few discreetly pulled out their phones, curiosity overpowering politeness, secretly recording the unfolding scene. Steven Seagal remained utterly calm. He didn't argue, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't flinch. He smiled faintly, a small, almost imperceptible curve of the lips, yet it carried a quiet weight. The smile was not arrogance, but a subtle reminder. He knew exactly who he was dealing with, even if the others did not. Every step Davis took, every condescending gesture, seemed amplified against Steven's calmness. The contrast in energy was palpable. Davis's voice, loud and grating, bounced off the marble floors and high ceilings, while Steven's presence created an invisible stillness in the lobby. The noise of clattering luggage and murmured conversations seemed to dim around him, as if the room itself recognized who truly held authority. Some guests whispered among themselves, exchanging puzzled glances. One older woman, leaning on her cane, muttered, "I've seen him somewhere, in the movies, maybe?" A young man filming the encounter on his phone froze mid-recording, captivated by the tension. The staff, meanwhile, remained oblivious. They laughed too soon, confident that their manager's authority would carry the day. Davis, blinded by arrogance, could not see beyond his own ego. He continued to lecture, wagging a finger and raising his voice, trying to assert dominance over someone who clearly did not recognize the rules in the same way. "You think you can walk in here and disrupt my lobby?" he barked. "This is my hotel, and I don't tolerate troublemakers like you." Steven's silence spoke louder than any argument. He didn't need words to fill the space. His calm, deliberate posture, the quiet strength in his eyes, the faint but knowing smile, all of it sent a message the staff couldn't interpret yet. Underestimating him would be their biggest mistake. Time seemed to stretch in the lobby. Every second felt heavier. Staff laughter died down as uncertainty crept in. The bellhop's hand trembled slightly as he adjusted luggage. Guests leaned forward, holding their phones, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. Even Davis felt the subtle shift in the room, though he refused to acknowledge it. His arrogance told him he still controlled the situation. Yet Steven remained composed. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he simply existed, radiating a quiet power. His presence alone created tension, a tension that grew with each passing second. It was a storm that hadn't broken yet, but its warning signs were impossible to ignore. And then, almost imperceptibly, the staff began to notice the change. The laughter faded. Whispers turned to cautious glances. Even the guests sensed it. The man they mocked was no ordinary visitor, and the manager who thought he ruled the lobby was about to discover that authority is not measured by volume or ego. In that moment, the lobby became a battlefield of respect versus arrogance, of humility versus pride. And everyone inside, guests, staff, and the manager himself, would soon learn that underestimating Steven Seagal was a mistake they would never forget. Steven Seagal slowly turned toward the exit, his movements unhurried, almost deliberate. Every step carried a quiet confidence that seemed to defy the chaos he had left behind at the counter. The staff exchanged glances, some smirking, others whispering, certain that the confrontation had reached its conclusion. They laughed softly, shaking their heads as if to say, "Finally, he's leaving." Manager Davis straightened his tie and exhaled a breath of relief, convinced he had won. "Good riddance," he muttered under his breath, unaware that the real storm had not even begun. Guests returned to their own affairs, some shaking their heads in mild amusement, others curious but hesitant to get involved. The lobby buzzed with the usual energy once again, or so they thought. Steven reached the revolving doors and paused, placing one hand lightly on the glass. His eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, seemed to scan the room with quiet precision. The air shifted subtly, as if the room itself had sensed a change in the balance of authority. He did not rush, did not shout, did not make a scene. He simply stood there, calm, controlled, and unshakable. Then, almost imperceptibly, he pulled out a phone and pressed it to his ear. The staff didn't notice at first, their attention already slipping back into the comfort of their assumed victory. But Steven's calm voice cut through the murmurs as he spoke, low, measured, and undeniably confident. There was no threat in his tone, yet it carried weight, a quiet authority that could move mountains if left unchecked. The first words he spoke made Manager Davis pause mid-sentence. "We need the legal team and the executive staff at the Grand Royale lobby." "Immediately," Steven said, his tone as calm as a summer breeze. There was no panic, no shouting, just clarity and control. And yet, the words sent an invisible shockwave through the lobby. Guests noticed the sudden shift in atmosphere. The once lively chatter dimmed. Phones were raised, cameras ready to catch whatever was about to unfold. Staff members froze, some gripping counters for balance. A bellhop dropped a bag and instinctively stepped back. Davis's confident smirk faltered ever so slightly. Something was coming, something that none of them had anticipated. Minutes passed like hours. The lobby was no longer a place of casual movement. Every rustle of luggage, every muted beep of an elevator, every soft footstep seemed amplified. Guests leaned forward, whispering amongst themselves. "Who is he talking to?" one asked, voice barely audible. "Is he important?" murmured another. The weight of anticipation was almost tangible. Steven ended the call and slowly pocketed his phone. He turned back toward the counter, his face still composed, but his eyes now carried the unmistakable intensity of a man who had been underestimated. The staff, previously laughing, now felt a subtle unease crawling up their spines. Even the guests, initially spectators, could sense that the balance of power in the lobby had shifted completely. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the weight of realization settling in. The staff had mocked a man who did not need to react to assert control. They had assumed arrogance could be met with arrogance, disrespect with disrespect. And now, they were beginning to understand that true authority does not announce itself loudly. True authority commands attention without a single raised voice. Manager Davis looked around, attempting to regain composure, but the uncertainty in the room was infectious. Guests exchanged questioning glances, some raising their phones again, sensing the significance of the moment. The staff tried to whisper, to reassure each other, but even their murmurs sounded hollow, swallowed by the tension that Steven's mere presence had created. And then, as if the universe itself had paused in anticipation, the first executive arrived at the lobby doors, followed by the legal team. Their appearance confirmed what everyone now feared and understood. The man they had dismissed as a guest was far more than that. He was the person who held the ultimate power in this space. The stage was set for the next 9 minutes, minutes that would forever change the lives of everyone in the Grand Royale Hotel lobby. The calm before the storm had ended, and the storm, silent but absolute, was ready to strike. Within minutes, the muted tension in the lobby was shattered by the sudden arrival of a sleek black car pulling up to the hotel entrance. Its polished surface reflected the afternoon sun, and the engine's low growl hinted at authority and urgency. Guests paused mid-step, turning their heads to watch the scene unfold. Luggage carts screeched to a halt. The staff, still reeling from the unsettling calm of the lobby, exchanged uneasy glances. Something significant was about to happen, though none of them could yet grasp its full scope. Through the revolving doors, 3 executives and 2 legal staff members entered briskly. Each carried folders and official-looking documents, their movements precise, professional, almost militaristic in nature. Their eyes were fixed on Steven Seagal, who had remained standing near the exit, calm and unshaken, as if waiting for the perfect moment. "Mr. Seagal, we've been waiting for you, sir," one executive exclaimed, rushing forward with a mix of urgency and respect. The tone in the lobby shifted immediately. It was no longer tense with suspicion, it was charged with recognition. Every whisper, every glance, every laugh that had seemed harmless seconds before now felt utterly misplaced. Manager Davis froze. His confident smirk dissolved instantly into confusion and panic. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The staff stared, mouths agape, trying to reconcile the man they had mocked with the authority that now filled the room. Their laughter from moments ago seemed a distant memory, replaced by a creeping fear that grew with each passing second. Steven Seagal lowered his sunglasses slightly and gave a small, faint smile, a smile that carried both composure and quiet judgment. "What you thought was a guest problem," he said slowly, voice steady and deliberate, "is actually your own problem." His gaze swept across the stunned staff, lingering on each individual long enough to make them squirm. The executives began moving toward the front desk, handing over documents and gesturing toward the staff who had been disrespectful. In just 9 minutes, every wrong decision, every careless laugh, every sneer of arrogance would be addressed. The hotel lobby, once a place of casual authority for Manager Davis, was now a stage for a complete reversal of power. Guests exchanged astonished glances. Some discreetly raised their phones, recording the unfolding drama. Others whispered to each other, "Is he the owner? I can't believe this is happening." The realization spread quickly. The man they had thought was just another guest, someone ordinary, perhaps even insignificant, was the one who controlled the fate of everyone in that lobby. Steven's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the panic slowly creeping into the staff. They were frozen, unsure whether to apologize, run, or simply stand in stunned silence. The legal team moved with quiet authority, confirming that Steven's presence was backed not by intimidation, but by the full power of ownership. Every document they carried, every file in their hands, was a reminder that authority was not measured by loud voices or harsh gestures. It was measured by responsibility, control, and respect earned. As the reality sank in, Steven's voice cut through the heavy silence once again. "From this moment on, there will be changes," he said, firm but calm. "Respect and professionalism are not optional. They are required. Anyone unwilling to abide by that will no longer serve this hotel." The staff's shock was palpable. Some whispered apologies, others tried to explain themselves, but their words fell flat. The lesson had already begun. They had underestimated the quiet storm, mocked the calm presence, and now they faced the consequences. Comment below. Would you stay calm if someone disrespected you like this? Could you maintain composure knowing you had the power to completely change the situation? In less than 10 minutes, the lobby had transformed. What had started as an ordinary afternoon at the Grand Royale Hotel had become a powerful lesson in humility, respect, and authority. The staff, the guests, and even Manager Davis would never forget the moment the quiet man they underestimated revealed his true power. The lobby of the Grand Royale Hotel was silent. Every staff member, from the bellhops to the front desk clerks, felt the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Manager Davis stood frozen behind the counter, his mouth slightly open, his carefully constructed aura of control shattered. For the first time in years, he had no words to command the room. He had underestimated the quiet, composed man who had entered his hotel just minutes ago, and the consequences were becoming painfully clear. Steven Seagal remained calm, composed, and unshaken. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to brandish authority like a weapon. His presence alone communicated power far beyond any manager's ego or staff's laughter. The executives and legal staff flanked him, silent and professional, yet their presence reinforced the truth that Steven held the ultimate authority in the hotel. He turned slowly toward the staff who had been disrespectful, his gaze calm but piercing. "Effective immediately," he began, voice steady and deliberate. "All employees who have demonstrated disrespect or arrogance toward guests, or toward me, are dismissed from their positions." A collective gasp spread across the room. Bellhops froze mid-step, front desk clerks tightened their grip on pens and folders, and even a few guests unconsciously leaned forward, sensing the magnitude of the moment. The staff who had laughed and mocked moments before now realized their behavior had crossed an invisible line, one they could not undo. Manager Davis tried to speak, to beg, or perhaps to explain himself, but Steven's steady voice stopped him. "Silence," Steven said, firm but calm, "is the first step toward reflection. Words cannot undo arrogance or disrespect." One by one, the staff members who had acted improperly were escorted away by the executives and legal staff. Some had the courage to apologize, their voices trembling. Some simply lowered their heads, unable to meet Steven's gaze. Each dismissal was a silent lesson. Authority is not about volume, intimidation, or mockery. It is about respect and professionalism. Steven's attention then shifted to the few staff members who had remained polite, calm, and professional throughout the ordeal. Their composure had not gone unnoticed. The executives subtly nodded toward Steven, acknowledging the courage and integrity these individuals had shown. "From now on," Steven continued, "respect and professionalism come first. Authority is earned by how you treat others, not by how loudly you can speak or how much you can intimidate." His voice carried a quiet power, one that demanded attention without shouting, one that reinforced the truth of every lesson he had demonstrated in the past hour. He stepped toward the respectful clerk who had remained calm and attentive, the one person who had maintained dignity in the face of disrespect and arrogance. "You have shown the behavior and character that this hotel requires," Steven said. "Effective immediately, you are appointed as the new head of operations for this branch. Lead with integrity, enforce respect, and ensure that professionalism is never compromised again." The clerk, a mixture of surprise and pride on their face, nodded deeply, barely able to find words. The staff remaining in the lobby watched in awe, realizing that respect, even in the smallest actions, could determine their future. This was more than a job lesson, it was a life lesson. Manager Davis, now completely humbled, finally found his voice. "Sir, I am sorry. I didn't know who you were. I was wrong." His voice shook, his ego completely dismantled. Steven simply nodded, acknowledging the apology without a hint of mockery. The executives quietly began documenting the changes, ensuring that the dismissed staff could not return, and that the new leadership structure would be implemented immediately. The guests, many of whom had witnessed the entire confrontation, whispered to each other, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others recording the moment as a story they would recount for years. Steven finally turned and walked calmly toward the exit. He had taught the lesson. He had restored respect and professionalism. He had rewarded integrity and held arrogance accountable. The lobby, once chaotic and full of ego, was now a place of silent acknowledgement, an environment where respect was no longer optional but essential. The storm had passed, leaving behind clarity, structure, and a lesson in authority that no one in that hotel would ever forget. Steven Seagal walked out of the Grand Royale Hotel. The lobby remained in stunned silence. Guests paused mid-step, staff froze in their new roles, and the echoes of the day's events seemed to linger in the polished marble floors. The entire episode had unfolded in less than an hour, yet the lessons were far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Respect, Steven had shown without a single raised voice, was not something that could be demanded. It wasn't a product of power, position, or a fancy uniform. It was earned through integrity, humility, and the way one treated others, even in moments of stress or confrontation. Those staff members who had laughed, mocked, or been arrogant had lost more than their jobs. They had lost the trust and recognition that could never be replaced. In contrast, the few who remained polite, calm, and professional had earned a future. One clerk, who had quietly observed and maintained respect despite the chaos, now stood as the new head of operations. That person's composure, integrity, and humility had been recognized and rewarded. It was a reminder to everyone in the lobby, and anyone who might hear this story, that true character is measured not by how you act when everyone is watching, but by how you behave when you think no one will notice. Steven's approach had been subtle, almost silent, yet undeniably powerful. He did not shout. He did not humiliate. He allowed the arrogance of others to reveal itself naturally and then, with quiet authority, restored order. It was a masterclass in leadership and a lesson in respect. Power is silent, and true influence is earned, not flaunted. The lobby, once a place filled with laughter at someone else's expense, had transformed into a space of reflection. The guests who had witnessed the incident whispered to each other, some recording, some simply staring in awe. Staff members who had survived the initial dismissals now understood the weight of their actions. Every gesture of disrespect had consequences, but every act of humility had value. Steven's actions extended beyond punishment. They were a guide. He had shown that leadership is not about ego or intimidation. It is about fairness, clarity, and the courage to correct wrongs while rewarding integrity. Those who observed learned an unforgettable lesson. Arrogance may seem powerful in the moment, but respect, once earned, carries a strength far beyond momentary authority. For Manager Davis, the lesson was particularly humbling. He had relied on ego, mockery, and intimidation to maintain control. In one short encounter, all of that had been stripped away. He had faced the stark truth that arrogance blinds, and respect, when ignored, can lead to a complete reversal of fortune. It was not only a professional awakening but a life lesson in humility and the limits of perceived power. This story reminds us all of a universal truth. Respect is not given because someone appears powerful. It is a reflection of one's own character. Treat everyone with dignity, even those you think are weaker, because life has a way of flipping the scales when least expected. The person you mock today could very well be the one shaping your tomorrow. Steven Seagal's quiet actions in the Grand Royal Hotel had become a lesson for everyone, staff, guests, and anyone hearing the story. It was a reminder that humility and integrity are not signs of weakness, but of true strength. Leadership is not about shouting the loudest. It is about making decisions that uphold values, fairness, and respect for everyone. Respect if you believe humility is true strength. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to salute your kind heart. In the end, the Grand Royal Hotel was no longer just a building where people came and went. It had become a symbol, a reminder of how respect and humility shape lives. Every guest who witnessed the event, every staff member who learned a hard lesson, would carry the story forward. True power is silent. True respect is earned. And one day, those who act with humility and integrity will find themselves in positions of authority, just as Steven Seagal had quietly demonstrated. The lesson was clear, the message unforgettable, and the impact lasting far beyond the walls of the hotel.